Thanks for tuning in at Brackeys.
Hello everyone and welcome to video number 22 in Make a Game, a cool series on making a video game in Unity. In today's video we're going to take a look at something really awesome, which is destructible objects. So objects that will fracture into multiple pieces and then have physics applied once we interact with them in a certain way. And how we're going to be implementing this today is by making our player destruct whenever he's killed by an enemy. We're also gonna fix a tiny bug which makes it possible for us to kind of get multiple game overs, which is kind of annoying. Awesome, so that's the schedule for today, and without further ado, let's just get right into it. You will note, however, that at some point we're going to be using Blender in this tutorial. That's not because you're going to need Blender in any way. I will of course be providing the model, but I thought it would be pretty quick and easy to show you how you can actually do this yourself. Cool. So first off, let's fix this multiple game over bug, and I'll just see if I can kind of get it to do it as we speak here. So I'm just going to turn on the volume on my monitors, and hopefully that won't be too disturbing here, but game over. There you go, we got 2 game overs and it loads the scene 2 times. So in order to fix this, we actually already have all of the logic in place. We simply need to do an if statement inside of our KillOn hit script. So double click that to open it up in Mono Develop. And we'll also open up the Game Master script just so we can have a look at what's going on. So remember, we made this static variable called isRestarting, and we kind of managed this inside of our restart level method. Well, now it's time to put it to use. So inside of our KillOn hit, we'll only call the GameMaster.RestartLevel if GameMaster. And remember, this needs to be capital letters because we are accessing a static variable and not the instance. .isRestarting is equal to false. So if we are not currently restarting, well, then we can just go ahead and restart the level. Cool. So, and basically we can just save that out, remove these and close down Mono Develop. And now when we hit play and roll over, and I'll just turn on the sound here. Game over. It will only do it once. We can go ahead and move on to the exciting part of today's tutorial, which is destructing the player on impact. So in order to do this, I actually want to kind of redo our ball object, because currently we are just using the default Unity sphere. Instead, I want to construct this sphere very easily in Blender, and then I want to kind of fracture it into multiple different pieces, and then inside of Unity we can spawn these pieces, give them some physics, and you won't be able to see that we are actually swapping out the original sphere with a new one. Hopefully, at least that's the dream. So I hope that this is going to be looking really cool. So what we are actually going to do is simply opening up Blender. So Blender is a free modeling piece of modeling software. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, if you have any questions, go to forum.brackeys.com. But Blender is a free modeling software and it's completely open source. So if you want to be a part of it, it's called the Blender Foundation. But if we just go to blender.org, you can download the version that I'm using here, which is version 2.74. That's the most recent stable build. And you can download and install it here, and it's of course also for Mac and Linux. So it's very multi-platform, and it's actually a really great tool. It's definitely capable of much more than we're going to be using it today. So let's just open up Blender, and you will be met by this starting screen. And once you get in here, we are going to right click on the camera here and on the sun, and finally on the cube while holding down Shift to select all of them. And then we're going to hit X and then click delete in order to remove those objects. When you're just starting out in Blender, you will notice that if you hold down your middle mouse button, you can kind of pivot around the center point. If you then hold down Alt while doing, or Shift while doing so, you can drag, and you can just scroll to zoom, or Control and middle mouse. So that's kind of the basics of navigating, and we're not going to be doing any of that basically. So in order to get started here, we're just going to hit Shift A. That will allow you to add a mesh object, and we're going to add the UV sphere. Then we can zoom closer in on this. And the number of segments that you want this sphere to be, simply how many subdivisions, is up to you. You can just choose the one that you want. Whoops. And I'm just going to go with the default of 32 segments. Also, we want to change the shading on this from flat to smooth in order for this to look like a proper sphere. So that's just going to round out the surface. Then up in the right hand panel here, we have basically the hierarchy, and inside of this, I believe in Blender it's called the graph view, but no, it's probably not. The outliner is what it's called. I'm not a very rapid Blender user, excuse me. So we're simply going to rename this to ball. And what we are going to do now is we're going to kind of UV unwrap this. And basically what that means is that we're going to take all of these faces and points called vertices inside of the 3D view, and we're going to lay it out on a flat plane so we can put a texture onto that. And that's kind of a whole science, and some people find it really difficult, including myself. But we are just going to do a very simple automatic unwrap, and it's going to look pretty great. So in order to do this, what you want to do is you want to go up here where it says default and change to UV editing. Then we can hit tab to go into edit mode, or you can change it down here. Then we're going to hit U in order to unwrap this, but we're going to select the automatic sphere projection. And this is going to give us a fairly bad unwrap. I'm not gonna lie, there are so many ways to unwrap a sphere, and some, probably most, are much better than this one. But in order to just get on with the tutorial, this is going to be just fine, especially because we are only going to be viewing this sphere from one angle, and it's only going to rotate along one axis. So that's going to be just fine, and now we can actually add a texture to it when we're back in Unity. If you don't do this, you'll probably just get a single color because all of the points just maps to one point on that texture, and that's going to equal only one color. Now this will actually overlay a texture. Cool, so just hit tab again to go out of edit mode, and we can go back into the default view. Now we want to do a fracture on this object, and that uses a plugin that can be enabled from the user preferences. So press Ctrl Alt U or go to File, User Preferences, and in here you can change all kinds of things in Blender. We're going to be using the cell fracture, so you can either search for cell or fracture and simply enable it here. Make sure that you have the version that I'm using or a more current one in order to get this plugin. Cool, so what we're going to do now is go over here on the left hand side and just hover over it, and a new button will appear called the Cell Fracture button. Now in here we can simply click that, and it's going to open up a whole other panel with a bunch of settings. Basically we want to limit the amount of objects we get to 15 because that's going to be plenty. You can't do more, but remember that we're going to have rigid body objects with mesh colliders on each of these. So the more you do, the more taxing on the computer. That should be pretty self-explanatory. Also, we're going to bump up the noise to 1 just to get some randomness in there. And other than that, we can just leave the settings as is and hit OK. Now, basically, it will look like nothing has changed except for in the outliner where we can now see 15 cell. Oh, okay, it only did 12, but we can see 12 cell objects. but we can't really see them if we click on them inside of our perspective view here. So what we're inside the viewport. So what we're going to do is we're going to change over to the layer that these are on. Because if you look down here, you can see that we have objects on 2 layers. So this is the first layer, and that's just our ball. And this is the second layer where all of our fractured bits are. And if we just right click on one of these and drag it out, you can see that we now have these solid pieces that the cube has been split into. So that's awesome. That's basically all we need to do inside of Blender. The rest we can manage in Unity. So now let's go to File. Let's save this. And the real cool thing about Blender is that it integrates extremely well with Unity, because we can just save the blend file. We don't even need to export to any FBX or anything like that. We can simply save it as a .blend. So I'm just going to navigate to my Unity folder here, my Unity project, which is Make a Game. Go under Assets. Let's put it under Models, and let's rename this to player or ball.blend. That's pretty much up to you. I'm just going to do player.blend, and let's save as a Blender file. Now we can simply minimize this, go back into Unity. Come on, Unity. There we go. And Unity is probably going to recognize that it has a new model, and there, it actually imported really quickly. What I want to do, you can see that it automatically creates this materials folder. I actually want to go into the import settings and just remove that. I don't want to import any materials. All of these settings you should pretty much be able to leave, except we're going to change the scale factor to 0.55. That's a magic number, but when I was playing around, that seemed to look pretty close to the object that we have here. Now let's hit apply on that, go under the rig, select none, hit apply, and do the same thing with animations. Oh, okay, that's disabled with the rig, that makes sense. So now we can simply remove this materials folder because, well, it's unnecessary to have it there. And you will notice now that if we close down Blender, you can simply double click this at any moment and it will open up in Blender, and you can make changes, save, and it will update inside of Unity. So it's really, really easy to do that. Cool, so let's drag this player object into our scene. And it actually looks like it's a bit too small now. But what I want to do is simply find the ball object here, because that has a bit different scale. So if we drag it onto the ball object, it actually looks a bit too big. So let's try 0.5 instead. I like to change all of my scaling in here. I think it makes it easier. Yeah, and that's actually pretty on point. Cool. So on the ball object itself, we're going to disable its mesh renderer so we can focus on the player object here. And I'm going to go ahead and rename that to graphics. Then under the graphics, we're going to have this ball object, but I also want to add an empty object. And we're going to reset the transform on this. And this is just going to store all of the ball pieces. So we're just going to say ball pieces or fragments or whatever you want to call that, and drag the ball cell onto that. And yes, we want to just lose the connection. We can get that back at any point. So now that we have all the ball pieces here, we can see all the cells. And first off, let's just disable the ball pieces and select the ball here and find the proper material. So we'll just get the ball wood one, and you can see that the unwrap is quite decent. I mean, it gets really tied up here, but from the side here it looks kind of all right. So inside of our graphics, if we want to kind of change this, we can, but I think if we see it from out here, it's going to look just the same basically. So I think we're pretty satisfied with that. You can, of course, just do a quick Google search on a sphere UV mapping in Blender, but this is going to work for now. So the ball here is simply going to store a mesh renderer. And I was thinking that we maybe want to move all of our rigid body. We're going to keep our rigid body logic here, and the same with the sphere collider. Then we're just going to disable that and disable this graphic here, and then enable the ball pieces. So once we have that in place, we can disable that and enable the ball pieces instead. And you can see that they also need a material to be applied. So we are simply gonna select all of the pieces, and you can multi-edit like this. And now select the ball wood material, and it's gonna look just like the non-fractured one, but with all of these pieces. Then in here, we can simply add a rigid body component, and we're gonna set it to use gravity and all the default settings there, and a mesh collider. However, we want these mesh colliders to interact with other mesh colliders. We want them to interact with each other. And in order to make them do that, we need to check the convex. And that's simply a simplified version of the mesh collider. But they will now interact with each other. And you can see this is only 12 pieces. If we had 100 pieces here, the calculations would be crazy and fairly unnecessary. So now that we have those, I think it's fair that if we just test this out. So I'm simply gonna click is kinematic on the rigid body so that it stays in place, and disable the sphere collider on that. And we should be able to just see what this looks like in game. And you can see how cool that effect is when it fractures and all these pieces go flying. You can of course add some force to these, but I kind of like the just calm fracture there where they just fall to the ground. Awesome. So let's re-enable or uncheck is kinematic on the rigid body and re-enable the sphere collider there. Then let's disable the ball pieces and enable the ball. And let's now update this prefab. Cool. So now we're going to be creating a script that will actually trigger this logic on the ball. And the question is where we want to kind of sit this script. So if we find the script that currently kills us, the KillOn hit here, you can see that it has this restart level functionality, which has a short delay. Well, I think that we should just use this and then maybe find a reference to our ball. It's kind of what I'm thinking here. So if we go into here and in the function, we can type collider. And we're just going to call this call info for collision info or collider info. And then we can say if call info dot, and for some reason the auto completion in MonoDevelop is being really annoying with me today. That's kind of so I'll just hope that I can wing this. But let's see, we have the ball tagged as player, so we can say if collider info dot tag is equal to player, then we want to find some stuff on the player. The question here is basically we can handle all of the logic in here, or we could have a script that sits on the ball here that basically handles everything for us, and then we can simply call the destruct method on that script. And I think that's what we are going to do. So we are simply going to keep this for now, simply comment this out and say get the destruct component, call the destruct method. Cool. So now we know what to implement here. And then we can go ahead and simply create a C# script on the ball. And we are simply going to call this self-destruct. Or is destructible? Is that better? That's probably better. So destructible. But this is going to be pretty specific to the player right now. But I think you should be able to tweak this in order to make other objects destructible. I mean, this is just the kind of logic that will trigger the destruction. We've kind of already made the destruction itself. So we can delete the using system.collections namespace. That's not something we're going to be using. And then we can make a public void that will do stuff for us here. So we're going to make a public void, and we're just going to call this destruct. And or not a public void. I am so used to C#. For some reason, I created a C# script here. I'm sorry. That's just kind of automatic from now. All my other series are in C#. Okay, so we're gonna do self-destruct, and this is gonna be of type JavaScript. And again, we want this to be destructible in JavaScript. There we go. I'm so sorry. Cool. So let's load this up. And yeah, so in here, we are simply gonna make a function. And we are gonna call this destruct. For some reason, I just can't spell that correctly. And inside of this, we basically want to disable the rigid body. We want to disable the collider. We want to enable the pieces, and we want to disable the whole ball model. So that's kind of a lot of references that we need. First off, we need a rigid body, and we're simply gonna call this, yeah, we're just gonna call this rigid body. Like this. We need a reference to, oops, again, the C#, that's crazy. Okay, we need a var rigid body of type rigid body. Like this. And we also need a var, and this is going to be the reference to our collider. And currently we are using a sphere collider. So we need a var sphere var collider of type sphere collider. We also need a, I think is rigid body just with a non-capital? Yes, it is. We also need a reference to our pieces. So a var pieces of type transform, and var and a whole ball of type transform. Cool, hopefully I got that right. Now in the destruct method, we need to do rigid body dot, and I believe it's just is kinematic, and we're gonna set that to false, or to true, I mean. Then in here we're gonna say collider dot enabled equals false. We're gonna say pieces dot set active, and we're gonna set them as false or as true now, and we're gonna set whole ball dot set active to false. Okay, there are definitely some errors in that. Also, we have an unexpected token. That's because, again, I wrote this as C#. So this is going to be our collider info, and it's going to be of type collider. There we go. So let's check this. So we have an ambiguous reference rigid body destructible. So why is this ambiguous? Let's see. Rigid body that is kinematic. That should be all. Oh, that's because it automatically declares the rigid body. So this is just going to be ball rigid body. And it's going to be the same with the collider. So ball collider. And the set active is not a member of transform, then it's a member of game object. Let's see how we went with that. And we have no errors, so that's amazing. Sometimes when auto-completion doesn't work, you just question everything you do. Cool, so let's see if this actually works. And of course, we're gonna have to set up a bunch of references. So on our ball here, we'll simply drag in the rigid body, we'll drag in the sphere collider, we'll drag in the ball pieces and the whole ball. Okay, so now let's actually implement this into our KillOn hit script. So first we want to get the destructible component. And in order to do this, we'll make a new variable. We'll call this destructible, but with a small d. And then we'll simply say that it's going to be of type destructible. And we're going to set it equal to get component, or call info. dot get component. And we're going to get the component destructible and simply copy it in here because it's not going to tell you if it's wrong until you run it. And then we're going to cast this as a destructible. So we are basically going to tell it that the component that we want to get is of type destructible. So that's kind of a clumsy way to do it, but it works. And then in here, we simply want to tell it that that the method that we want to call is called destruct. So we are simply going to call the destruct method. So we get a reference and we call the method. That's a very normal way of calling public functions. Cool. So now that we've kind of saved that out, we should be able to head back into Unity now. And this is going to work pretty nicely. Actually, it's going to work just fine, just until we respawn. So have a look. If we hit play here and we roll over, we should dissolve, and we do. But when we respawn in a bunch of pieces. So that's kind of not what we are looking for. So basically what we want to do here is we want to kind of or undestruct ourselves. And in order to do this, there are a bunch of things that we can actually do. We want a method that will kind of enable all of these components again. And we also want a way of kind of resetting our ball pieces. So instead of keeping track of their positions and resetting them, what I want to do is I simply want to make the ball pieces a separate object that we can then spawn in. So we are simply going to re-enable this. And we are going to kind of drag it out here, and we are going to lose the prefab connection. Then I want to apply this ball, and then I want to make the ball pieces into a separate prefab, and I'm just going to drag that into the prefabs folder. And I want to reset the position on those. So now that we have that going for us, we can just delete the ball pieces. And we want them to scale with our ball here. So we'll see if they do that when we instantiate them in. So what we can do here is we can find our ball. We can go into our destructible script. And in here, we want to, instead of setting active some pieces, we want to spawn them in. So first off, we want a reference to the place that we are going to spawn them in. And that's going to be of type transform, and we're simply going to call this the pieces parent. Then next up, we want a var pieces prefab, and that's also going to be of type transform. This way we can simply instantiate. And what we want to instantiate are the pieces prefab. And where is the pieces parent dot position and pieces parent dot rotation. And then we can parent the pieces onto that. So we're going to set the pieces. Okay, we want a reference first here. So we are going to make a var, and this is going to be the clone. That's kind of standard, calling it the clone in Unity. And then we want to do clone dot, and we're going to set parent equal to the pieces parent. And this is probably going to complain about that we need some casting. No, it actually does that for us in JavaScript. So hallelujah. Cool. So the pieces parent here, we want to just drag in the graphics, and the pieces prefab, we want to find that in our prefabs folder. So simply navigate in there and drag in the ball pieces prefab. Now we can apply this ball, and we should see this working just as we did before. So it's not going to fix the bug there. And indeed, they do actually scale down. So what we can do in order to kind of fix that is we can just fix the way that we have scaling set up at the moment. So if we find our models, find our player object, and just drag it up here, we can simply we should simply be able to take the scale factor here and find a scale factor that reminds a lot of, oops, we of course want to set the scale here to 1, 1, and 1. And that actually looks pretty good, I think. So let's just make sure that our sphere collider is actually good on that. So 0.7 is what we're gonna go with, I think. So now that we have that set up, we can simply delete off the player here. And now that should be completely synced. Now we don't have this weird scaling issue. And that's why I like taking care of any scaling inside of the scale factor. So now when we play here, bump into him, you can see that it smoothly transitions on that. So the next thing that we are going to do is we need to reset the ball. So we need to remove the pieces, or we could keep the pieces there and never actually parent it. Now that's interesting. So let's just not parent this at all. But we want to keep the position and all that. So it's not going to go back with our player. So if we try this and hit him, the pieces will stay there and they are independent of the rest here, and they can actually be there for as long as we want. So I think we're gonna destroy them after a certain amount of seconds, but it's pretty fun that they're there for kind of for a little bit. So let's destroy the clone here, and we might need to do .gameObject on that one. Not sure, we're gonna find out. And we're gonna destroy them after, let's say, 10 seconds. Let's just give it a while. So if we hit play here, we'll find out if GameObject will do.
Game over.
And yeah, indeed. So in 10 seconds, these will disappear. Cool. So, oops, nope. Destroying the transform component is not allowed. So we actually need to do .gameObject, oops, .gameObject on that one. So let's hit play here. And this is going to be a pretty long video. I might need to cut it up. We'll see.
Over.
So there, and we should actually see these destroying now. I'm just going to make sure. So we'll just wait the 10 seconds. And yeah, indeed they do disappear. Cool. So what we want to do on the ball is we want to re-enable this rigid body, and we want to re-enable kind of set the kinematic to false again and re-enable the sphere collider and the ball here. So I suggest that inside the game master, where we already have a reference to a ball, we can simply call a method. So we'll just do function destroy or destruct. And then in here, we'll just basically reverse this code. So we're going to set rigidbody.isKinematic to false. We're just going to enable the collider. We are not going to do anything with this prefab. And we're going to set the whole ball.setActive to true. And now inside of our game master object, and excuse me if I'm going a bit fast here, but the video is getting kind of long. Inside of this, what we can do is we can simply find the player here when we are restarting the level. Down here, when we're setting the position to the latest checkpoint, we can just do player. Or again, we're just gonna do basically the same that we did in here. So we can just copy this if we want to be really effective. So we can just get the destructible component and whoops, we are gonna get it from the player here, and then we're gonna call the not the destruct but the destruct. So I think this should actually work. And if we go ahead and bump into this guy, we'll fall into pieces. Our ball will appear. And again, it's the same ball. We didn't have to spawn in a separate prefab. And now there are these fun pieces to play around with it. And they will disappear, so it's not unreasonable, the amount of pieces, but they're there. And of course, if you're not satisfied with the pieces here, I made them kind of quickly, you can just go back in to Blender and tweak them. I mean, it's as simple as double-clicking the file. So excuse the video being so long, but I think that it was a pretty fun thing to do. And yeah, just play around with it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.